I'm Vanessa Baca with the Office of Neighborhood Coordination. This video is part of a series on parliamentary rules and procedures. I'd like to introduce Adam Hathaway, a professional registered parliamentarian. Adam will talk about quorums, amendments, and how these things fit into your bylaws. Adam?
Thanks, Vanessa. It is a pleasure to be here to share some of my experiences with all of you as a professional registered parliamentarian. One of the most important things that organizations can focus on to try to gain a certain amount of clarity and perspective on their organization is to have a really great set of bylaws. Some of you may be in the position of writing bylaws for the first time, while others of you might be getting your hands on your bylaws and trying to figure out which way is up and what your role is in the organization. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts of what makes good bylaws and focus on some certain areas of common interest and maybe even a little bit of confusion. So the overall structure of the bylaws, the individual sections they have, can be remembered by a fun little mnemonic that I was taught when I was learning how to put bylaws together. And that little mnemonic is no mommy see pa. And what that stands for is name, object, membership, officers, meetings, executive board, which is board of directors, committees, parliamentary authority, and amendments. So when you're crafting bylaws or revising bylaws, make sure that those elements are there. And that way you'll be able to know what you should be adding, and it'll help you think about what kinds of rules you would like in your bylaws. To focus on certain things, we're going to take a look at the section regarding boards. Boards of directors are often created in order to allow business to occur by a selected few between meetings. If you have monthly meetings, you may not need a board of directors. If you meet quarterly or only annually as a membership, you may want to have a board of directors mentioned in your bylaws that can take care of business. But if you do, make sure that you add some very important elements. Make sure that you specify the number of people who are to serve on the board. I don't suggest a range like 9 to 12. That can be very confusing sometimes. I suggest the specific numbers. The board of directors shall be 9. The board of directors shall be 12 to be elected at the annual meeting in May, as an example. Make sure that you also include when the board is elected. If you have different members of the board being elected in different years or cycles, maybe because you don't want turnover on your board occurring at the same time, make sure you're very clear as to when that turnover occurs when those elections are held. You also want to be very specific as to what powers the board has. Boards of directors and officers only have the powers that are given to them in their bylaws. And so if the bylaws do not delegate a particular authority, then the board or the officer does not have that authority. Somebody can't really say, well, where does it say that I can't do so-and-so? But rather, you find the place in the bylaws where it says the board can do such and such, or an officer does have such and such authority. So make sure that all that authority that you would like the board to have is very clearly stated in your bylaws. Another section that is of great importance is the section on your membership. Do you have dues? If so, state what the dues are. Are there different classes of membership? Do certain classes maybe not have a vote at a meeting, like honorary? Are there any deadlines for dues? So for example, if you list dues, but you don't list a penalty for not paying dues, then that means you could have a member who doesn't pay dues for years and is still a full voting member. If you would like a member to be suspended or sanctioned in some way, maybe they can't vote at meetings for not paying bylaws by a particular time, you definitely want to stipulate that in your bylaws. One other portion that some folks have a lot of question on is quorum. What is it and how should we state it? Quorum is simply the minimum number of members required to conduct business, which means that if you don't have that minimum number, you cannot conduct business. And if you have quorum, but then at some point through the meeting you lose quorum, you can no longer conduct business because that minimum number of members required to conduct business is no longer present. So in your bylaws, you want to state very clearly, quorum for the General Assembly shall be 50. Quorum for the Board of Directors shall be 5, or whatever your number is. Some organizations like to use percentage of memberships, and you can if you want to, but just be aware that sometimes that can cause some confusion and lack of clarity if membership numbers change or board of directors numbers change, especially if you have a board with varying membership. Sometimes that can cause confusion as to what exactly quorum is. So put it simply in your bylaws, quorum shall be X. And then finally for our session today, a segment that gets a lot of attention and something very noteworthy is the section on amendments. When you read your bylaws and you review them, and your organization really should do a review about once every 2 or 3 years, even if you don't think you need to, go ahead and do it. You may find some surprises, and if there are certain practices that have come into play, then you should add those practices to your bylaws if you find that there might be a conflict. Your section on bylaw amendments should state notice and a vote. Usually it takes 2/3 of those present and voting, a 2/3 vote, to amend bylaws. You can change that number if you want to, but I wouldn't make that number too low because your bylaws do provide to all of your members what the structure and culture of your organization is. So it should take a little bit to change it. I recommend 2/3 is the standard. You can list anything that you want. The other portion that's very important is notice. You should specify in your bylaws what notice for bylaw amendments is. Is it notice shall be given at the previous meeting? Is it notice shall be listed in our monthly newsletter? Notice shall be given 30 days in advance. Whatever it is, you want to be very clear as to the notice that, hey, we're going to have a bylaw change coming up. This is very important. We want to give you a heads up. The notice should contain the exact language of what you want to change. Specifically, what is to be struck, inserted, struck and inserted, or added. And the difference between insert and add is insert is anything that you're going to place within sentences or within paragraphs, and adding is something you put at the end. And all of your amendments that may occur on the floor to the amendments have to be within the scope of notice. All that means is if your notice about changing the bylaws talks about this specific item, then all amendments have to be in regard to that specific item. You can't have any amendments on the floor that do not pertain to the amendments as listed in the notice. And so as a final thought, some of you may be very overwhelmed when you take a look at your bylaws. You may even think that you're stuck with what you've been given. But actually, you have a great deal of authority, more power than you think you may know. Any member may move bylaw amendments with proper notice and a 2/3 vote. So if there is anything that you would like to change at all, you have that authority to make that motion, get other members who feel the same way, and then surgically enhance any improvements for your organization that you might wish. So again, please take a look at those bylaws, learn the sections, make the changes to the things that you'd like to change, and go ahead and do what is best for your organization. Thank you so much.